I never believed in ghosts, at least not in the way people talked about them. To me, it was always a mix of superstitions and spooky tales to scare kids. So when I found this old house tucked away on the edge of town, I thought it was perfect. It was affordable, quiet, and had plenty of space for me and my family. The basement, however, was unfinished, just exposed beams, cracked cement, and dust settling into every corner. But I figured I'd use it for storage, maybe even make it a little workshop once we got settled in. At first, it was the perfect home. The walls creaked in the night, but it was just the house settling, nothing more. But then, the whispers started. It was subtle at first. I'd be unloading boxes into the basement, and I'd swear I heard a soft murmur, a faint murmur, like voices in the distance. I thought it was just the old pipes, or the wind through the cracks in the walls. But every night, the whispers grew louder, clearer. At first, they were just unintelligible sounds, like a crowd murmuring in the background of a conversation. But over the next few weeks, the whispers began to change. They were no longer just background noise. I started hearing words, fragments of sentences. Is he coming down here? She doesn't know about the keys. The dirt, so deep. It was unsettling, but I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Maybe the house had some strange acoustics, some air currents that made the walls carry sound in odd ways. Still, the whispers continued, and they were starting to get specific, personal. One evening, I was in the basement, going through a stack of old boxes when I heard it again, louder this time. A voice, clear as day, calling my name. John ... I froze. It wasn't my imagination this time. Someone, or something, was in the basement with me. I stood there, frozen, heart pounding in my chest. John, you shouldn't be down here, the voice whispered so clearly that I could feel it against my skin. You'll never leave. I ran up the stairs in a panic, slamming the basement door behind me. I didn't go back down for days. But the whispers didn't stop. They followed me, creeping into my thoughts during the day, murmuring things only I would understand. The worst part was that they started to speak about my family, details about us that no one could have known. The boy's in his room, waiting for you, it whispered one night. She's cooking dinner, but she won't be able to save you. I tried to ignore it. I tried to push it out of my mind. But it wasn't just whispers anymore. I began to feel something in the walls, something pressing against me, suffocating me with a presence I couldn't shake. That's when I decided to investigate. I had to know what was happening. Something wasn't right with this house. I started by looking into the previous owners. The house had been vacant for years, but it had a history. Old, strange, unsettling history. The previous owner was a man named George Thorne. He had lived here alone for decades, a recluse, no family to speak of. No one really knew much about him, but there were rumors. People said he was a bit eccentric. Some even said he had a strange obsession with the house's basement. I couldn't find much more than that, but something about George Thorne's name seemed to linger in my mind. I had to know more. I went back down to the basement, determined to find out what was going on. The air was thick with a damp, musty smell, and the whispers started immediately. You're getting closer, aren't you? The walls seemed to hum with the sound, vibrating around me. I could feel it in my bones, like the house itself was alive, breathing, watching. I dug around cautiously at first, moving boxes and shifting old furniture. But then something caught my eye. A small, nearly hidden trapdoor in the corner of the room. It was tucked beneath a layer of dust, barely noticeable, unless you were looking for it. I opened it slowly, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into even darker depths. The whispers were louder now, more urgent. Don't go down there. But I couldn't stop. Something inside me compelled me to descend. I reached the bottom of the stairs and found myself in a small, dirt-floored room buried deep beneath the house. The air was thick, stifling, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on me. And there, in the corner, partially buried in the dirt, were bones. Human bones. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the truth. The whispers, the voice calling my name, speaking of my family. It wasn't a ghost, wasn't a trick of the house. it was something darker. The house wasn't haunted, it was cursed, tied to the twisted deeds of its past owner, George Thorne. He had done something horrific down here, something that had left a mark on the very walls of the house. Someone was trapped beneath the floor, angry, restless. And now, they were speaking to me. And as I stood there, horrified, the whispers started again, this time loud enough to drown out everything else. "You should have never moved in." It's strange how a place can feel both familiar and alien at the same time. I had only been living in the apartment for a few weeks when I first noticed the door. It was tucked away in the far corner of the basement, almost hidden by a stack of old, unused furniture and cobwebs. The door itself was old, its wood warped and weathered by time, with an iron lock that looked as though it hadn't been touched in decades. The apartment itself was perfect, small, cozy, and relatively cheap for the area. But the basement, there was something about it that unnerved me. I told myself it was just a typical old building, with its creaks and groans, the smell of mildew, and the occasional flicker of the dim overhead light. But then, there was that door. It called to me, even though I tried to ignore it at first. I couldn't help myself. The curiosity gnawed at me. What was behind it? Why was it locked? I had asked the landlord about it once, and he just shrugged, muttering something about old maintenance rooms, and nothing of interest. But his evasiveness only made me more determined. The day I finally decided to open the door, I had no idea what I was walking into. I had spent weeks trying to forget about it, but it was always there, lurking in the back of my mind, growing louder and louder. So that afternoon, with the keys I had borrowed from the landlord, more like snatched when he wasn't looking, I made my way down to the basement. It was quiet when I arrived. The air was thick with dust, and the only sound was the faint hum of the building's old boiler. I stood there for a moment, looking at the door. My heart raced, but I was too far gone to turn back now. The lock was surprisingly easy to break. With a twist and a tug, the door creaked open, and I was greeted by darkness. I took a step forward, my breath catching in my throat. A chill swept through the air, colder than anything I had felt in the building before. I fumbled for my phone, using its light to guide me. What I saw made my stomach twist. The room was small, cramped even. The walls were covered in yellowed photographs, hundreds of them, some old, some newer, but all disturbing. Faces that seemed to stare back at me, eyes hollow, expressions vacant, as if they were trapped in time. I quickly stepped back, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. But then I saw it. Strange symbols painted on the floor in what looked like old dried blood. They spiraled outward, forming an intricate, terrifying pattern I couldn't understand. There were other objects in the room too. Odd trinkets, some of which looked like they belonged in an antique shop. Others, I couldn't quite identify. Old dolls, cracked mirrors, and a small wooden box, the lid slightly ajar, revealing something hidden inside. My mind raced, my breath shallow, but curiosity had already taken hold. I had to know what was in the box. I opened it carefully, my hands shaking, and inside were more photographs, each one more unsettling than the last. These were not just any photographs. They were photographs of my apartment, taken from angles I knew I had never seen before. Some showed my front door, others my windows, but the most chilling were the ones taken from the shadows of my own bedroom, shots of me asleep. I slammed the box shut, my heart hammering in my chest. This was too much. I had to leave, but as I turned to flee, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from the corner of the room. I spun around, my breath caught in my throat. Nothing, just darkness. I was alone, or so I thought. As I backed out of the room, the basement door slammed shut behind me. I could hear the lock clicking into place, trapping me in the dark hallway outside. The sudden silence was deafening. I didn't stop to think. I didn't even look back. I ran up the stairs and slammed the basement door behind me, the echoes of my footsteps filling the empty hallways. I thought it was over. I thought maybe I had just imagined it all, some twisted trick of my mind. But then, the noises started. Every night after I returned home, I would hear them. soft at first, like whispers in the distance. But as the nights wore on, they grew louder, more distinct. Footsteps, low, dragging sounds that came from the basement. At first, I convinced myself it was just the old building settling, the pipes groaning with age. But the noises didn't stop. They came every night, without fail, as if something, or someone, was waiting for me in the dark. I tried calling the landlord, but he was no help. He shrugged it off, muttering something about old pipes again, about the house being too old to know exactly what was happening. But I knew the truth. Whatever was behind that door, it wasn't just some forgotten room. It was something darker, something alive, something watching. And then one night, after the noises grew too loud to ignore, I decided to go back down there. I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. But when I reached the basement, I froze. The door, the locked door, was open. And in the shadows beyond, I saw a figure standing still. Its face was familiar, but distorted, twisted, with a grotesque smile. I could barely breathe. The only thing I could do was stare, frozen in fear, as it stepped closer, and the whispers grew louder. "Welcome home," it said. Then everything went black. We were all looking forward to the weekend getaway. A few of us had been friends since high school, and the others we had met through work or college. But no matter the background, we all shared a love for adventure, for getting away from the hustle and bustle, and just being together. The house we rented was perfect. It was isolated, tucked into the woods far from the nearest neighbor, with a massive backyard and a cozy interior. The kind of place that just begged for board games, late-night stories, and plenty of laughter. At first, everything seemed perfect. We arrived on Friday evening, excited and ready to disconnect from the world. The house was an old Victorian-style mansion, surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides. The 4th side had a steep driveway that led down to a peaceful lake. It was the kind of house that had a character to it, the kind you see in movies, creaky floorboards, ornate wooden banisters, and tall, dark windows that almost seemed to watch us. We had no idea, of course, that the house was already watching. We spent the first few hours unpacking, laughing, and settling in. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and something faintly metallic. We explored the house, cracking open bottles of wine, bouncing from room to room, and admiring the vintage wallpaper and dusty chandeliers. Everything was perfect, except for the basement. It was odd. The basement door was locked, but that wasn't the weird part. It was the way the door was locked. A heavy old padlock with a chain wrapped around it, securing the door as if it were hiding something dangerous. At first, we shrugged it off. It was an old house, after all. Maybe the landlord had locked it for safety reasons, or to keep out trespassers. Probably just storage, Matt, one of our friends, joked as he tugged at the lock. But there was something about that door that felt off. A nagging feeling, like there was something just beneath the surface that we weren't meant to see. "Let's leave it alone," Sarah said, her eyes glancing nervously at the door. "Maybe it's best we don't mess with it." But the door kept calling to us. We could hear it in the silence of the house, the basement, locked away, waiting for us. The first night passed uneventfully, with nothing more than the normal creaks of an old house settling and the occasional flicker of lights that we all joked about. We stayed up late, playing cards, drinking, and telling ghost stories, mostly in jest, of course. But as the evening wore on, I began to notice something unsettling. The house was colder than it should have been. No matter how high we turned up the heat, it was as though the chill had seeped into the walls. At first, we laughed it off, blaming it on the old house. But then, the cold began to feel different, unnatural. The air didn't feel just chilly. It felt suffocating, as if the temperature itself had become thicker, heavier. The next morning, we decided to explore the area. We hiked around the woods, enjoying the quiet and the rustling of the trees. But by the time we returned to the house, there was a palpable tension in the air. The atmosphere had changed. It felt like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something. That night, after a few too many beers and a couple of rounds of poker, we were feeling brave. The alcohol loosened our inhibitions, and suddenly, we were standing in front of the basement door. The padlock still hung there, but it felt like an invitation now. A dare. "Let's see what's down there," Jenny suggested, her voice laced with mock bravery. She took a step toward the door, almost like she was drawn to it. I felt an unease creeping up my spine, but I shrugged it off. Everyone else seemed to be on board, so I followed them. After a few minutes of fumbling, Matt managed to break the lock. The door creaked open, revealing an abyss of blackness. The cold air that poured out from the basement was almost suffocating, thicker than any chill I'd felt before. "Jesus, that's cold," Chris muttered, rubbing his arms as if to ward off an invisible force. We stood at the threshold for a moment, the darkness almost alive, breathing, and then, one by one, we stepped inside. The basement was vast, much larger than we had expected. We scanned the room with the flashlight, and the beam cut through the blackness, revealing old furniture covered in dust, forgotten boxes piled in corners, and piles of old rotten rags. But something about the place felt wrong. Wrong in a way I couldn't explain. The air was dense, and my chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air into my lungs. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a pile of junk, some forgotten relic of the house's past. But when I looked closer, my blood turned cold. In the farthest corner of the basement, standing motionless, was a figure. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a shadow, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw it. A person, or something that resembled a person, standing completely still, facing the corner of the room. "Guys, come on. This is just a prank, right?" Matt said, but his voice trembled. His bravado cracked. We all stood there, frozen, staring at the figure, unsure whether it was some elaborate joke or something far worse. We laughed nervously, but the laughter didn't feel right. It wasn't genuine. It was strained, anxious. "Yeah, real funny," Chris called out, but there was no response. The figure didn't move. "Maybe it's just a mannequin," Jenny suggested, but the words felt hollow in the cold, stagnant air. The figure stood absolutely still, its back turned to us, like it was unaware of our presence. It didn't even acknowledge the sound of our voices. The longer I looked at it, the more unsettling it became. Something was wrong. No person could stand so perfectly still, unmoving, for so long. It was as if it wasn't even alive. "Let's get out of here," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. But it was too late. The tension in the air was palpable, suffocating. We took a few hesitant steps toward the figure. As we did, it turned slowly, its head swiveling to face us. And that's when I saw it. Its eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to draw in the light from around us. Its face was gaunt, skin stretched tight over bones, with lips pulled back into a grin that was anything but comforting. A chill ran down my spine. I couldn't move. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls pressing tighter and tighter, as if they were trying to suffocate us. It didn't speak at first. It just stood there, watching us with those empty, soulless eyes. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Then, in a voice that wasn't quite a whisper, but wasn't quite a growl, it spoke. "Leave. Now." Thank you for joining us for these chilling true basement horror stories. From whispering walls to locked doors hiding dark secrets and figures lurking in the shadows, each tale reminds us that basements can hold far more than just old furniture. We hope these stories sent a shiver down your spine, and now you'll think twice before heading down into any dark, forgotten space. If you enjoyed these tales, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying true stories that will keep you up at night. And if you have your own true horror story, don't hesitate to share it with us. We might feature it in our next episode. Who knows? Maybe the next terrifying tale will be yours. Stay safe, and remember, sometimes the scariest things are the ones hiding just below our feet.